Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. These days, it's rarely a case of if you'll be hacked and more of a question of when. Once the attacker has passed your defenses, they cover their tracks and systematically infiltrate your network to steal information or shut your business down. You need to rethink the way security is delivered for your digitally transformed business, and there's one security solution that delivers it all: NetScout. Get visibility without borders for consistent detection, mitigation, and prevention across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Learn more at securityweekly.com/NetScout. We are here at Black Hat 2019. This is day 2 of our interview series. Super excited about all the fun and interesting people we get to chat with, including Andrew Homer. He's the VP of Marketing and Business Development at Morphisec. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to have you here. Now, it's interesting.
Great to be here.
I feel like a stalker sometimes because we track as many vendors as we can.
Yes, you do.
And I've tracked Morphisec, and we've never actually sat down and I don't think we've ever done a formal briefing or anything. So I wanted to start and just tell me and our audience, what is Morphisec? What problem do you solve?
Sure. Okay. So we're focused on in-memory runtime prevention. Mm-hmm. Okay. A lot of the solutions that you see walking the floors of Black Hat here focus on detection. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the way that we prevent is actually quite simple. We take the memory assets, the most critical assets that you have in your organization, the assets that are being exploited for vulnerabilities, and we randomize them. We randomize them in a very sophisticated way where we change the memory structure so that when the adversary is looking and expecting, that's okay.
Similar to ASLR, but a different approach.
Sort of ASLR on steroids.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because we're doing much more than just moving.
Yep.
You know, we're changing the names, the links,
the
table structure.
Yeah. Yep.
And we're doing it, number one, in an unpredictable way, keyless randomization, and we're morphing every single new process that starts.
Hence the name, Morphisec.
Yes.
I got you. Okay.
Morphisec.
That makes sense.
But, you know, the adversary's expecting a static target.
Yep.
Okay, that's the whole premise of moving target defense. Okay, they're studying the memory assets. They're expecting what to find. And what we do is we set a trap, a decoy. Every new process that we morph, we leave behind a static stub, okay, of the original memory structure that provides a trap. And so
does their code still execute?
It executes, okay, but it can't do anything. It's trapped. And the execution provides the forensics, the very deep detail around the origin of the attack, how it got in, you know, all the way to whether it tried to use a weaponized macro utilizing PowerShell, for example.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing that you can allow it to execute, but almost in like a little sandbox inside of memory. That's no small feat. You must have patents on that, right?
Yeah, we have about 8.
Okay, I was going to say that's pretty unique.
We have about 8. So we do it in user mode, you know, non-disruptive to the user, completely invisible to the user, to the system, to the CPO, to the memory, but
a
lot of special
really
sauce behind the scenes.
I mean, if you're changing the names and just moving stuff around, it's not going to impact performance. You're just changing where stuff is, not how it executes, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And when we do morph, we step aside. So by default, we're not taking up any resources on the endpoint. And so we do that across servers, PCs, laptops, cloud workloads, VDI environments, virtual applications, which is important because it's so lightweight. It's only a 2 megabyte agent taking up no memory. So we provide a very wide swath that we call our unified prevention platform.
I really like this for 2 reasons. One is we see a lot of these Windows exploits. I think they're harder and harder to construct a working exploit. Randomization and morphing aside, it's really hard. Like, I've seen some of the smartest people I know really struggle with I don't know if we're going to be able to test for this vulnerability or create a reliable exploit just because Microsoft has made it harder.
Sure.
Just in the stock Windows environment, they've made it harder, right? And then, you know, the second thing is, as an attacker, if it's executing, I'm like, oh, cool. I'm good. Success, right? Move on to the next target.
Right.
It's sleeping there. I'm good. I may not realize that I was unsuccessful until way later in the game.
That's correct.
Right? And now I'm not trying anything new and other ways to get on the system because I think I'm already in.
Right.
So for those 2 reasons, I think that's brilliant approach.
Yeah, and it's an economics game too, right? You know, the attacker is trying to get at the endpoint, right? That's where the crown jewels are and how you can move laterally within the organization. And we frustrate them, right? Every single new process is morphed. They try again, trapped, morphed. And we see it persist. You know, the interesting thing is if you look at vulnerabilities, right? Just take, you know, something like Adobe Flash 4878, right? It was in the wild for 3-4 months. No one knew about it. Okay. And if you were a good doobie, you would have, the patch came out, you would have patched the systems, and you would have gone through this whole cycle. But during that entire time, you're exposed. And so in our approach, we don't need any prior knowledge of the vulnerability.
Right.
The fact that it's trying to execute itself within, you know, the false memory, okay, is by default deterministically malicious.
Right. Right.
So it's also, we sell it as a virtual patch. Okay. Things like certainly on Windows 7, there's a lot of Windows. About a third of the install base out there is still Windows 7.
Yeah. How far back in Windows do you go? Windows 7, or do you go XP or
XP as well?
Really?
Yes,
Interesting.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So, you know,
that's a really. I'm not sure today, but at least briefings I was doing a year or two ago with enterprises, they were still like, we got Windows XP, we can't get rid of it. And I'm sure it's still, obviously it persists today as well.
Yeah.
And they'd always come to me like, what do I do? And so few vendors had any support for, you know, they may say, well, it'll run, but we don't really support it kind of thing.
Right.
But you're saying it's fully.
Yeah. So, you know, if you think of what Microsoft's doing, well, you know, end of year, you know, you have end of life, right?
Right.
And that's a big problem, particularly for organizations that just don't have the operational ability to transition over to Windows 10 for a variety of reasons.
Huge.
Perfect example.
I've got actually a story. My wife was in labor, and she's like, "Oh, look, it's the baby's heartbeat." And I look up at the screen. I'm like, "Is that Windows 95?"
It probably was.
She's like, "Seriously?" I'm like, "Now I have to tweet that." She's like, "Seriously?"
Yes.
And she's like, "No tweeting." And I'm like, we're kind of trending on Twitter. It was actually one of my most retweeted and viewed and liked tweets of all time. We actually did shows on healthcare security because of the explosion of that one tweet, which comes down to the problem you're solving, which is it's really hard for organizations to get off some of these legacy operating systems, especially in healthcare.
Yeah, they're tied to very expensive multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment, right? And that's the fundamental reason oftentimes. You know, and so by providing this virtual patch, by knowing that the customer is able to, you know, prevent the attack pre-execution without any prior knowledge, it becomes a risk and compliance compensation control. Right. And then we give them the peace of mind that leveraging, you know, migrating over Windows 10, we're now integrated with Defender AV.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a nice symbiotic relationship. So we give them a roadmap all the way up through, you know, Microsoft ATP in our integration there.
Now, I have to ask Andrew, because I'm sure customers and prospects ask you this question all the time. Are there legitimate applications that might have trouble or crash because of the way you're manipulating memory?
No, that's the most popular question that we get. When you talk about, hey, we morph memory and we scramble it, it sounds scary.
Yeah.
It sounds scary. So, you know, all of our customers go through a proof of concept. It's pretty simple. And what they find is, you know, no impact to the environment.
Awesome.
And from a conflict standpoint, I mean, we're on just about every system with every type of application software that you can possibly
you've deployed
manage.
enough now to
Yes. And, you know, and it's out of the box. We have a default protection plan, but customers can kind of tweak that to some of their legacy application, customized applications in their protector plans.
Yeah, I've seen older apps do like really weird things. Yeah.
So you know, unlike say endpoint detection response, which we don't do, there's not this long tuning period. You know, we're deploying 10,000 endpoints a day, and they're up and running. And so, because it's not carrying a heavy signature database, it's not doing the detection and you know, a heuristic analysis.
So tell me about the Windows 10 integrations. You just formalized a partnership with Microsoft.
Right.
So are there like extra protections in Windows 10 that you're taking advantage of to do this protection?
Yeah, it's a really important part of our business right now, and it's taken off. You know, customers, as they're migrating over to Windows 10, are finding that there are inherent strong security features that are embedded in the operating system. Defender AV is a dang good antivirus product. Okay, and the time is right for them to say, hey, look, I can adopt this. It's already embedded in the operating system. I don't need another agent. Why am I paying for this other legacy AV thing?
Right.
Is usually the question that we get. And they're deploying Morphisec on the unknown, for the unknown attacks, you know, the zero-day attacks, the sophisticated in-memory attacks. But you still need antivirus, okay? So what we've done is we've integrated with Defender AV, okay? We're populating the Defender AV alerts into Morphisec's Unified Security Center together with our unknown alerts, so they have one single pane of glass. One of the gaps that Windows Defender AV has today is it does not provide visibility management capabilities. Okay.
Oh, so
that's what we're stepping up. We stepped up to that challenge.
I got you. So your dashboard will take in the data from Windows Defender, and I got you.
Correct. And you know, the reason that we're successful in swapping out legacy AV is that customers are saying, all right, I'm paying for this budget. Okay, I can better use this budget protecting against the zero unknown attacks, and then leverage good Defender AV, and Morphisec ties the two together by providing end-to-end visibility across known and unknown alerts.
And I love solutions that are like,
easy.
Yeah, like I can save money in my budget because I don't need this other product, and I can be more efficient operationally because I'm not responding to as many of alerts because you're just protecting it before it gets there, or you know, protecting it. So
you got it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I love when you can do the math like that and go, wait, we save money and time. Yeah, that's like a no-brainer, right?
That's certainly about it. And you know, I think the Defender AV as a antivirus tool, it has really stepped up. I mean, they've put a lot of really good innovation in that to the point where, you know, it's the timing's right, particularly with the transition over to Windows 10 for us to take advantage of that and you know, help customers ultimately be more secure, no change to budget. Okay, and have it be operationally simple.
That's awesome. Yeah. If folks want a trial or a demo, like how does that work? Can I get a free trial, or do I have to get a demo? Or
you can. You know, so for customers that want to check out our products, okay, we're happy to run a demo for you. You know, there's some learning in terms of how it works, some education to how it works, right? Because oftentimes customers think that we are an antivirus or a detection tool.
Sure.
You know, but you know, oftentimes when customers are installing us for the first time, they're just trying to figure out, hey, does it conflict with anything? And it's so lightweight, doesn't consume memory or CPU, and it doesn't, you know, crash their other drivers and other applications. So, you know, we always have a try and buy, you know, with customers.
But I have to register, right? So there's no free trial.
You do.
It's okay. I mean,
and here's the thing that's different than, say, like, you know, trialing a CrowdStrike or a Cylance is, you know, you'll install us and it will be silent because we're only protecting that for the unknowns. You know, the 0 days they're bypassing antivirus. Okay, and so it may sit there for a couple days, but when it does light up, that's when they pay attention to it and they're like, "Whoa, what just got through?" Right? And then our forensic analysts look at that, and oftentimes it is a, you know, very sophisticated, evasive piece of malware or a 0 day. So
I think we get too much data from our security tools, and it's refreshing to say, like, we only alert when there really truly is a problem, right? Because I think we have this notion that we need to collect everything and sort through it, right? Yeah, it's like next to now today, forget it's impossible.
I mean, visibility is super important in an organization. I mean, you want to be able to trace it back to the root. I think the issue is that we're reactive. Everything that goes bump in the night. What was that? What was that?
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that folks can't keep up with it. A lot of these alerts are just dropping on the floor because, you know, detection is really the only thing the market has been told, the only thing customers have been told. I think we're bringing back, I think, certainly it's our belief and our growth has shown this, the most innovation in prevention in the last 10 to 15 years. And so we're sort of bringing back prevention, right? Pendulum has swung so far over to detection that folks are just fatigued with the complexity.
Well, sounds awesome. So folks want to go get it, morphisec.com.
Morphisec.com. Come visit us out.
Great. Yes, Thank you so much, Andrew.
Awesome, Paul. Appreciate it.
Welcome to Security Weekly. We are broadcasting live from Black Hat 2019. We're in our suite at Mandalay Bay, and for this interview, I am joined by Brett Wahlin, the Chief Information Security Officer at Respond Software. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So we're going to talk about lights out SOC, and we're going to talk about automation, which is a kind of a hot topic. Been a lot of activity in the SOAR space as of late. Some big acquisitions by some very big security vendors. But What you guys are doing with Lights Out is a little different than SOAR. So let's start a little bit with just kind of the premise for kind of the problem around the SOC, and then we'll talk about how Respond does it from an automation perspective.
Yeah. So when we look at kind of the SOC and the problem around automation, and what I've been trying to do for years is how do I staff a SOC, and how do I keep that level one kind of engaged in the program, and it's always where you have the most turnover. As we started looking at the building a SOC and seeing some of the things you can do with machine learning, artificial intelligence. This is back in the days when I was CISO at HP. We started learning that, hey, we can actually get some of this automated. And when we talk about machine learning and automation, what I'm really referring to is the automation of a decision. And so when you look at what a level one analyst does, they're looking at all these events coming off your SIM, and they have to sit there and clear that channel. They have to say, is this good? Is this bad? It's a highly repetitive, what I refer to as a transactional security task, and it's quite frankly boring, which is why we have to continue to hire and train these SOC analysts, because they'll do the job for a little bit and then they'll leave. What I was able to do in the quest for Lights Out SOC is deploy Respond software. I was actually their first customer, and that really had a decision model based in math as a probabilistic decision model, and it would look at events and it would calculate many different factors. And so the number of facts that they were looking at for just the very first model, which happened to be intrusion prevention. So that very first model would look at 60 different things every time it would make a decision. I mean, could you imagine an analyst that could actually, every single time that person looked at 60 different things, just to make that one decision? And then those analysts, they can maybe do 75 to 150 events every single hour. The software can do about 80,000 per hour. So you're looking at 60 facts, 80,000 an hour. And what you end up getting is, when you buy something like a Respond analyst, you've got the equivalent of like 42 different analysts that you've just now deployed in your environment, and they don't take a break. They don't get sick. They don't get bored.
They don't take vacation.
Yeah, they don't just start clicking things to clear the channel. It's highly effective. And because they're looking at all the facts, we're also now reducing the number of false positives, because there's just so many different checks that are being done. So when you actually do have an escalation, the amount of time that the analysts that are like at your level 2 or your level 3, the amount of time that they spend hunting down events is now really effective, because it's kind of cleared out for them. You see some of the pieces and like, oh, we know that's a false positive because we check so many different areas. When something escalates, now the level 2 is really onto something, and so that time is now spent much more effectively. So that was kind of the start of Lights Out SOC. Can I get to the point where that whole level 1 just doesn't exist? It's really done in software. So it's not there yet. We're still, there's models that need to be developed, but it's really close. So.
Which is different than SOAR, right? Because really, the security orchestration automation response platforms are really about automating workflow and the steps required to potentially, investigate and or remediate an attack, for example. What you're talking about is, I'm just determining whether that is an actual event that I should even do anything with. It's that first decision of, I see something, but I don't know if it's something I should research or not. And so it actually sits in front of the SOAR platform, really, in this particular case, right?
Yes, correct. So if you look at the architecture for SOAR, you typically have a SIM of some nature that's collecting the events and going through the correlation and what do I need to filter out and what do I need to send to an analyst. Then you have an analyst making a decision whether or not this needs to be fixed, remediated, et cetera. And then that then goes to your SOAR platform. So on the other end, I can write a playbook, run books, and it will go do its thing. That analyst still has to be there. And so we fit in where that analyst is. So you can still use SIM, you can still use your tools, you can still use SOAR. Now you're just processing through an awful lot. And the one thing I found when I started deploying this was that my reliance on SIM really started to drop. You build so much into it because you have that constraint around 150 events an hour. Take away that constraint, and what do you end up having? So you can look upstream and say, well, I don't have to filter out as much. I can just take the data. And so my reliance on SIM, my investment in bandwidth in the SIM platforms, all can begin to drop because I don't have that constraint around 150 events an hour.
Right, because you don't necessarily need the SIM to do the correlation step
Yeah.
for you,
Yeah,
right?
right.
If you're taking that data raw and you can reassemble it and analyze it through your models, then in some respects you can kind of sidestep the SIM potentially, depending on whether the customer wants to do that or not. I'm curious, is your normal deployment with a SIM and really bringing correlated events from the SIM to you, or is it more of a replacement for the SIM in bringing the raw data feeds to you? How do you see those different deployment models today?
It really depends where the customer is. So you have a lot of customers who have an investment in SIM.
Yeah, and a pretty big one.
Yeah, and there's no reason to stop that investment. We can loosen it, so you don't have to continue to pay for the bandwidth, and you don't have the engineering teams to write the use cases. We can loosen that up a little bit, but we can fit right in there. That's one model of customer deployment where that's really effective. We really just, where that human analyst is where we sit.
Yep.
The other forms of customers are those that are kind of in an MSSP, or maybe they have 4 guys who sometimes look at a SIM and then do a bunch of other stuff in the company because it's a smaller team.
Yeah.
What we're enabling them is to now have 24/7 coverage where they never had it before, or they might have had an MSSP that's really expensive, maybe not as effective as they want it to be. They can run this in conjunction with an MSSP or even as a substitute for one. So it really architecturally, it'll meet the CISO where they are in their program. Are they transforming a program? Are they building a program? Are they maintaining? What do they want to do? As long as there's that that element where a human analyst has to make a decision, that's where we slot in, and we just make that super efficient and very cost effective.
Got it. So when I think about deployment for a second of the solution, is it a bunch of integration points for the different data feeds to come in to respond, and then once a decision is made, it's a set of integrations to potentially your SOAR platform to actually then start your playbooks? Is that kind of what a typical implementation looks like?
Yeah, you would implement it. We need the raw data feed coming in, so that can come from the tool itself. So your IPS, your endpoint protection.
Yeah, your log.
Yeah, so we can take those direct feeds and we'll parse that out and run it through our math model. Or we can take it from the SIM. So it goes into SIM, it goes through its pieces, and it comes back out, and then we'll take that into our math model and make the decision. Once the decision's been made and an escalation point has hit, then we can feed it downstream. So however your workflow is set up, do you send that to your SOAR platform? Do you send it to
a level 2 analyst,
a level 2 analyst, a ticketing system, anything like that will then send that off. So it's really just that person getting really, really fast. So imagine somebody who can just, you hired the best analyst in the world, and they're just superhuman capacity. They come in and they're doing 80,000 events an hour. All the rest of the workflow still there. We don't require people to dump their investments or change their processes or work around it. It's just where that person is. We just make them much more effective.
Got it. Now, some would say, well, putting a solution in place like this would eliminate security jobs. But I think if I think about the skill set requirements here, right, I'm trying to augment where we know we have a pretty big skills gap in the industry, and that is kind of those level 1 analysts. Hard to find, hard to maintain after they're trained, et cetera. And so I think the positioning is I can make your SOC 1 analysts kind of more efficient from a software perspective, but I still need level 2, I still need level 3, I still need some of these other jobs. Maybe they're easier to recruit for, or maybe easier to maintain when I have them, because it's always that balance of automation versus people, right?
Right, exactly. And so it's not replacing people, because there's never enough people.
Right.
So what we're doing is we're really taking that job and you kind of divide security work into transactional security versus cognitive security. And so it's the work that is just highly repetitive and really mundane versus the thing that really takes a lot of thought around troubleshooting and curiosity and trying to figure out what just happened here and how do I fix it. So if you look at that, level 1 is 100% transactional. It just takes an event in, I look at a few feeds, and I make a decision. So that's just exactly perfect for a machine to do. So when the software is making those decisions, you can move the level 1 to level 2. You can change your kind of your mix of what you're doing. But what you really ended up doing is for a small smaller type of a tools investment, you're really getting an OpEx hit because you're getting the equivalent of going out and hiring 40 people.
Yeah.
And so from an OpEx perspective, I mean, the CISO's budget loves this because it's a tools-based approach to headcount.
Right.
And so you can, it fits in the budget nicely. Now you've got a tool that doesn't really care that it's a mundane task. And so the roles that the people on the team are actually doing are now much more fulfilling because it's actual real security work. You can get in and do something as opposed to just clicking a box and going event, not an event.
Right.
So it all around, it makes the budget much more friendly. It makes the work a lot more interesting. So the retention, it's much easier to hire into somebody who's going to do some real analytical work where I'm hunting down, I'm finding something, I'm working on an engineering
being
problem.
a little more proactive in your security program instead of being so reactive to all the data feeds.
Yep. And then when that job is more fulfilling for a person, they're going to stay longer.
Yeah.
So it's not the complete solution to the security staffing issues, but it really helps in this space.
Yeah, and I think what people need to realize is heads are expensive. It's not just the salary, it's the benefits, it's all this stuff. And when you manage a budget, you realize how much cost in your budget gets eaten up by people. And so if you can augment with that with software, that's a great way to kind of really keep your budget spend under control, which is great, and really fills a gap in where we've seen a lot of shortfall when it comes to the skill sets required for cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So I think that's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of value around, look, you get an efficiency gain almost instantly, right? Because you're adding now 40 heads. You get a budget reduction potentially because you don't need the heads because you're using software to do it. Where's some of the other value of deploying response software for the customer?
So I think as we go down, the areas you mentioned, some of the other value is just in our ability to understand and find these events with the reduction of false positives. So as I mentioned, you're spending an awful lot of valuable resource time hunting down things that really don't need to be hunted down. So if you reduce that, you've now got a team who's spending their time a lot more effectively, and you're able to really get those deployment of your resources to where they need to be. The other thing that I was finding as I was deploying this, I think it was my second time around trying to get to the lights out SOC concept, the efficiencies really come in your up and downstream tooling costs. So as I mentioned, that kind of the constraint that we architect around with that human analyst, the 150 events an hour, removing that now allows me to make some tool changes, and it's more of a journey. So the tool changes really happen over time. But it frees up, a lot of your CapEx budget because you don't have to invest in tools to really augment or handle what the humans' limitations are.
Right.
So now I can deploy that into other tools that I would actually effectively control some of the security issues.
Right.
So there's a lot of gains that you'll get that are really outside the SOC because it's mainly budget redistribution once you've actually got the ability to not invest so much into your level one, or if you're running an MSSP, not to have quite the bill when it comes due every month.
For all those resources.
Yeah.
What about shrinking time to detection, right? That's the other big one that everybody's trying to chase, right? We've seen the numbers come down from over 200 days average time for detection. I think now we're down to 160 days or so. Do we continue to see that get tighter and tighter because we have better decision processing done up front and we can start to shrink those windows?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because you would think right off the bat that mean time to detection would really drop.
Yeah.
And it does. But the issue you still deal with is you've got to have, when like the respond analyst will detect instantaneously. So when the event triggers, we'll see it, we'll make a decision, and we know.
But it's the
escalation.
The other piece,
So we escalate it.
So the decision, yes, but for somebody to actually do something about it, maybe not quite yet.
Yeah, not quite yet.
Okay.
So, but instantaneous decision, maybe it takes the level 2 another day to get to it or 2 days to get to it. So you're still dropping it down to maybe 2 days, 3 days when you've actually uncovered an event. The other thing that's interesting around that is most times, at least in my career, when I've got an incident, I usually get a cluster of incidents. So I'll get 3 or 4 and you're like, oh, we're under attack. What is happening? This is crazy. It's just, everything is broken loose. Once you get into the investigation piece of that, maybe 2 days down the road or something, you'll realize they're all connected.
Yeah.
And they're all the same incident, but you didn't know that up front. With all the math that's going on and seeing all the different facts that are happening, kind of a really interesting benefit is we see these little clusters as the same event really fast in the process. And so I know that, oh, I've got one event and it's actually triggering in 4 or 5 different locations. And then so I don't have to deploy mass quantities of resources.
And that makes the whole investigation and everything around that incident easier to tackle.
Right.
It's awesome. If people want to learn more about Respond software, where should they go?
Probably easiest is to the Respond software website. You can look us up, respond-software.com, and there's plenty of resources. We've done a lot of research on white papers, kind of how it works. You can request a demo, and we'd be happy to kind of work and see how this fits into anybody's program.
Awesome. Brett, thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for watching, and we'll come back soon. Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. It's day 2 at Black Hat. We're still recording live. We're in the suite at Mandalay Bay, and joining me is Matt Gangwer, Director of Managed Threat Response from Sophos. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you want to talk about misconceptions around threat hunting. But before we go there, I actually want you to help define threat hunting, because I see lots of different definitions and a lot of different uses of that term.
Right.
Let's start first and let's kind of level set everybody. What is threat hunting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And like you said, there's a lot of different variations of it out there in the marketplace. So kind of how we look at it is it's a human-led initiative. So there needs to be a person, an individual, a threat hunter involved in it, but it's machine assisted. So we have a bunch of tools that kind of empower us to be able to go out and search and look over the data sets that we have available to then come to conclusions about malicious intent or whether something's either good or bad.
And when you talk about different tool sets, right, where are some of those data sources that are key to a threat hunting campaign?
Yeah, and that's one of the big things that we like to toss out there as one of the misconceptions. A lot of organizations and companies will say, I purchased an EDR product, now I'm doing threat hunting, right? And that's not necessarily the case. EDR at its core is one of, it's a very rich data set for us to be able to use, to be able to investigate and query information off the hosts. But there's a number of other different pieces of information that is also valuable to us. Networking logs, firewalls, IDS and IPS logs, all great sources of information. Starting to see a lot of organizations move to the cloud. So how do we incorporate some of the data coming off of, say, AWS or Azure into the data sets that we have?
Yeah, I think endpoint data is important, but network traffic is definitely important.
Exactly.
All the logs correlated around all those network and endpoint activities. I assume external threat intelligence plays into this as well. I mean, part of threat hunting is looking for some of these threats. So
yeah, and that's definitely a piece, right? So there's kind of easy things to go look for when you're threat hunting, and intel sources is a great example of that. We get new hashes from binaries or intel on malicious IPs, and we have kind of our research division, Sophos Labs, that provides a lot of that for us. But then there's also more complex things that we can do when you start trying to identify, say, tactics, techniques, the TTPs that attackers are using. And those are a little more complicated and usually require a more rich data set to be able to go look over.
Right. So misconception number 1 you raised, well, we actually talked about number 2 a little bit. I'm going to go back to number 2 in a second. But the most disingenuous misconception is that threat hunting can be automated.
Yes. Yeah, so I kind of look at it in there's two degrees, or I guess different sides of the field on that one. There's what I believe is not necessarily possible is kind of automating the entire thing. So being able to identify something as being malicious, and then being able to apply the necessary context to what you're looking at to make a decision. So from end to end, from identification to response actions, that's something that I don't necessarily think is completely possible to automate.
But there are pieces that I think can be automated, right?
Exactly.
Data collection and some of the base correlation and some of that data analysis piece can be automated.
Correct.
Then what you're saying, I think, is an analyst has to make a decision based on that analysis of whether this is a potential threat that needs to be resolved or not, right?
Yeah,
and that's why you think humans there.
That's exactly right. So tools, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs effectively without tools. There's no doubt about that. But it's what we're able to get out of those tools. Tools are really good at detecting known knowns. So we have known bad hashes, IPs, what can be created in, say, a rule engine to make some more complex things. But there's also going to be things that fall more into like a gray area where, seeing PS exec or something like that running on your network, it's an admin tool. People use it for legitimate purposes, but it's also used a lot by malware and attackers that are trying to do something nefarious.
Right.
So it's the taking that information and being able then to say, okay, you have a human looking at it, and they can kind of get context and what the intent of that command was and whether or not it was malicious or intended.
Yeah, low and slow attacks,
Right.
where they're not hitting certain thresholds on your network alarms, right?
Right.
Another use case of where somebody has to just look at the data and go, wait, this doesn't look right. It's like really bad. John Strand always used to say, he said, look for the least things on your network and figure out what those are, because typically that might be an indicator that something malicious is going on because it's actually on the low side of the scale, not on the volumetric side.
Yep, and there's two different places to look, right? It's what's commonly occurring because seeing a lot of traffic or a lot of activity on a host or an endpoint is also indicative of something that could be bad.
Right.
And then one host doing one thing that's no one else is doing, also something else that should be kind of looked at and investigated.
Yeah. The other piece of automation, so now I've made a decision, right? I have a threat hunter. I think there are parts of the response plan that can be automated. There's a lot of playbook,
right?
The SOAR tools are out there talking about the playbooks, and I think there is some level of automation on that workflow. How does as I think about Sophos, kind of where do you sit on those kind of two spectrums from the automation side?
Yeah, so we have really good telemetry coming off of our EDR Intercept X product and our XG firewall. So we have a lot of good data from endpoint network, and then we have our team who was recently brought on board to offer up our MTR services to the customers, and we're there providing 24/7 threat hunting, response, and investigation for our customers. So where we sit at is we have these tools that are identifying interesting things, and then we have a team there 24/7 evaluating, looking at it, and then ultimately making decisions. And you're exactly right. How we make and go about doing those response actions is through playbooks. But again, it's something easily defined. So we have certain actions that we want to take on certain things, but there still is that human touch in the middle of it to say, okay, we've identified this. We think it's bad. We're going to go ahead and do something about it.
Got it. We did cover part of this one, but I want to go back to it for a second. Is misconception number 2, by having endpoint detection and response, you're doing threat hunting. And again, we talked about aspects of this. You need the network data and some of this other telemetry data as well. As we think about the managed detection and response is becoming an interesting field. And the question I have for you is, what's the difference between managed detection and response and managed threat response, or isn't there a difference in your mind?
It's a really good question. We're actively having that conversation internally. So managed threat response is our service, what we're offering to our customers, and we think MDR is more of the broad category of the industry term for what we're kind of grouped into. So they're very similar in what they do, but MTR is what we're kind of going to market with.
And if you think about threats being much more holistic than just the endpoint detection and response, which is where a lot of the MDR services are based on, it's a managed endpoint detection and response. It's not broad enough if you're not also bringing in network and the other pieces. So I would also think that MTR is probably a little more holistic when you look at both the EDR and the network components as part of that practice.
Yeah, exactly right. So we want to make sure we have good data, different data, not just looking at one single source. So then, we have a very good kind of proprietary first source information coming from our tools, and we're also kind of evaluating what it would look like to look at, third parties, such as maybe getting Active Directory information, Office 365, other apps that customers are likely to be using, and pulling that in to enrich our data set.
Great. Misconception number 3, you can add data into a SIM and start threat hunting. I actually like this one a lot because my history with SIM is interesting because I'm not a big SIM fan, but cover this one for a second. I got a few variations on this one too.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of promises with SIM that it was going to be the end-all, be-all for the security industry and answer all of our questions. And it does provide a really good service for us. It's a place where we can throw a lot of information and start asking questions of that data. I think one of the biggest problems that we've had with it, though, is it's not necessarily as easy to get the data there, and it's very hard to keep it consistent. And for us as threat hunters, we want to make sure that the data quality of the information that we're looking at is solid, because then it allows us to be more efficient, more effective when we're saying, all right, I want to know if anything's talking to this IP address, and now I can query over my network logs, endpoint logs, and anything else that may have that data attribute. So it's making sure that data coming into those platforms are consistent, which is something that's often overlooked.
Yeah, there's a couple things with SIM that some people disagree with me, but I said, look, SIM was built for compliance first. And there are guys from the early days of SIM that says, no, that wasn't the case. But in my opinion, SIM took off because compliance took off, and somebody needed a log correlation engine, and it ended up being the SIM. But the SIM wasn't, I don't think, well architected for scale. And that's why you've seen some of the next generation kind of SIM products come out, like a Splunk and others, because they just couldn't handle the volume to do true security incident event management, in my opinion. And you take that issue along with predefining these use cases, right? If you think about threat hunting for a second, we're looking for the unknowns, right? Not the known knowns. And the SIMs work really well when they know what to look for. If I see this pattern, blah, 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 create an alert. That doesn't work for threat hunting because you're trying to find those unknown things that you don't quite know what they are. So defining them in your SIM and letting your SIM do that for you just is counterintuitive to threat hunting.
Yeah, and we kind of have three buckets that we kind of look at threat hunting in, or different attributes of it. So there's the automated threat hunting. So that's, you have a rule, something, flag something, and now we need to go look at it. So that's what automated to us. It's like a detection. And then there's lead-driven hunts. So I know that there's some information here, or I know that this actor uses these techniques and this IP address, and now I can go look for it and see if that information is present in my data set. And then the last one's kind of the lead-less hunt. So I'm going to ask a question, maybe reverse into, maybe there's an attacker on my network doing X, and then I'm going to go look in the data for that. So it's kind of picking and choosing which ones of those to tackle and prioritize.
Got it. So Sophos pulling this all together is a managed threat response capability. I think part of an acquisition, right?
Yeah, our team came from Rook Security, which was acquired about 2 months ago by Sophos.
Got it. If people want to learn more about the new service that's coming out or any additional information about Sophos, threat hunting, where should they go?
So we're currently in our early access program. So we have a number of customers that we've involved in the EAP that we're running right now. So I think the marketing team's still working on putting some of that stuff out, but check out sophos.com. And keep an eye on the collateral there, and we'll be going GA and open to customers in the near future.
Okay, great, Matt. Thank you so much for joining
Thanks
us
a lot.
on Security Weekly. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.